Hey everybody, welcome to Narrative Live. It is a big show for us today. We're doing a big special on Jeffrey Epstein, I'm not quite sure. We're very
I think he
excited.
pronounces it Epstein.
Epstein, thanks for clarifying that. A lot of good stuff we found out, a lot of stuff you have not heard anywhere else. You're gonna have to stick around for a very detailed and interesting hour, but there is stuff at the end that's gonna make you go, maybe there is something here that we need to be paying attention to that's much bigger than just the incredibly large-scale investigation into the assaults and kidnappings of young women and teenage girls. Tracie McElroy, nice to see you today. How are you?
I'm doing great, Zev. Good to see you too.
It's
I want to point out to you guys this is going to be a really detailed show. We spent a lot of time, actually 2 full days, investigating. You probably noticed that we weren't on Twitter much. That's because we were eating, drinking, breathing Jeffrey Epstein. And we're going to do our best to give you some timelines and a lot of information you probably have never heard before. So it's going to be a full show. I hope you'll stick around for it all.
Yes, it's been actually a couple of days and a couple of nights, so we're very happy to see each other again. But also very happy to see some new faces here. So without further ado, here's Jeffrey Epstein's special. The secret life of Jeffrey Epstein, we're saying it's secret because although we have been finding out many secrets from his life, we may not know everything yet. And over the last couple of days, we've been discovering layers and layers of intrigue, questions, especially around his finances, around his past, and also related to his girlfriend slash friend, Ghislaine Maxwell. And that is, in fact, where we start our story. It's 4:45 a.m. November the 5th,
Fifth?
1991. That's when British media mogul Robert Maxwell's body was discovered. The police report said he was naked, stiff, and floating in the sea off the Gran Canaria Islands. He had been on board the Lady Ghislaine, named after his daughter. She's, of course, a name we've been hearing a lot about over the last few days, as we've just said. And for years, she was the lover of the accused pedophile Jeffrey Epstein, and also the recruiter of many of his victims, allegedly taking part in his sexual exploits. Now,
Yes, and he was found, like you said, drowned. We don't know. There's been a lot of speculation about Robert Maxwell's death. Some theories have been he committed suicide. Some were that he just died of natural causes. He was a very big man. But there are also speculations that he was murdered.
indeed, and there's a good question to ask: why would a man so wealthy have decided to kill himself anyhow? Because he didn't have those many reasons. It was discovered just prior to his death, then and the full details emerged right afterwards that he had been misusing the pension funds of the good people who worked at the Daily Mirror, a large amount of money, which he was using to buoy up the price of the Mirror Group, which was a very successful media group in the United Kingdom, but at the time was not doing very well. Still, we don't think that that quite accounts for a good reason for him to have committed suicide or anything like that, because his wife said there's no ways he would have. He was just not that kind of guy. But there's also other indications that there were other reasons why he might have been interested, or other people might have been interested in getting rid of him. So he couldn't reveal more details about them.
Yeah, so let's take a look. So we have a couple pictures of Robert Maxwell. He ran in some real serious circles. I mean, one picture we have him with Mikhail Gorbachev, one with Margaret Thatcher, and then that other picture is with the British Prime Minister Harold Wilson. So he was hanging in some really important circles.
He was indeed, and there's also enormous amount of speculation, not so much about whether he was a spy. I think everyone sort of acknowledges the guy was a spy. There is some speculation about which agency he was spying for. Certainly the front runner amongst them is the Israeli Mossad, but he was also allegedly an informant for the KGB and even possibly the MI5. Now, it is true, as we found out in recent weeks and years here in our own United States case, that you can be a spy for a number of countries at the same time. In fact, that's how the intelligence agencies often do their business. They get to exchange secrets and information that way. They get to do deals. They get to make sure that, counterintelligence is actually countering. And otherwise, they also do the real intelligence work that they do. The question is now, did any of those agencies have a reason to kill Robert Maxwell, the great media publisher from the United Kingdom? And that answer gets a little bit easier to answer once you take a look at a couple of really well-sourced books that have been out there.
Yeah, and what also is interesting, Zev, is that there was no official investigation into his death. The British Prime Minister at the time, he chose not to investigate. This happened off Spain's coast, and he felt that the Spaniards might not welcome the foreign interference. So
Yeah.
we really don't know officially what happened to him.
Well, the Gran Canary Islands, as you might have seen in the map earlier, are actually off the African coast. They are ruled by Spain, but they're a delightful place to go on vacation. Not a delightful place for Robert Maxwell to go on vacation, because that's where he met his match. It is interesting that John Major, at the end of the day, decided not to send anyone to investigate. So this great media tycoon dies. No one really knows how. The Spaniards weren't that interested in the investigation either. And that leads again to the speculation that maybe, just maybe, the Mossad was involved in his death. Now, in his book, Israel's super spy, Gordon Thompson, or Thomas, I should say, says there's ample reason to believe that Mossad killed Maxwell. And that's because even though Maxwell was born in Czechoslovakia and spent most of his time in the UK, because of the Nazi occupation of the Czechoslovakia as it was known then, he was a big supporter of Israel. He spent a lot of time there. He felt like that was his home. He gave generously to Israeli businesses and also gave Mossad some of its biggest secrets over the years. He was in fact involved in not just one, but three of the biggest Mossad scandals that touched us here in the United States. The Pollard affair, which you might remember, involved a lot of secrets and an Israeli spy in America. There's also the Promise affair, which was the theft of a very interesting software, which might be a precursor to what we know today as the National Security Agency that spies on everybody. And also the Mordechai Vanunu scandal, which is the scandal that revealed who the person was who revealed that the Israelis had developed nuclear weapons. He was also abducted, not killed, but abducted, I think, off a boat and disappeared for 18 years.
Another interesting side note, Zev, there's a senator who was real close to Robert Maxwell, and he was from Texas. His name was John Towers. Well, just 6 months before Maxwell was found drowned, this John Towers, who was real close to Vice President George H.W. Bush, well, he died in a commuter crash. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there.
I mean, commuter crashes happen. The coincidence in timing makes you think, especially because when you really look at Towers' involvement in all of those scandals I just mentioned, he was involved in each of those. So if anyone was handling Maxwell in the United States on behalf of the Mossad, it could be that Mr. Towers was. Now, we don't know for sure. He's a Texan senator. Anything could be true. But it certainly seems coincidental, at least enough, that there might be a link between the two. But the real reason why we know, or we suspect at least, that the Mossad was the agency that ultimately killed the British publisher Robert Maxwell is from the book, where, I got to say, this is a very well sourced book. Thomas speaks to the handler of Robert Maxwell, the Israeli handler, and basically the handler told him that Robert Maxwell had told the senior Mossad officers that he would not go cap in hand begging to bankers, because Rupert Murdoch had done that. He didn't quite like the look that Rupert Murdoch had, having to beg to survive in his newspaper empire. And he suspected, at least Maxwell did, that the Mossad would help him. Or he said he would ... The or else part was, as according to Ari Ben Menashe, who's a former Israeli intelligence advisor, he was saying that he would blow the whistle on everything that Mossad knew. And that was not a threat that anyone could expect to get away with. I suspect that is true today, as it was back then. The Mossad is not the kind of... Well, no intelligence agency is the kind of agency you want to mess with, but I bet you the Mossad guys are not that keen on any of their secrets being revealed anywhere. So
yeah, but it's super interesting, Zev, because even if the Mossad had him killed, he was buried on Jerusalem's Mount of Olives. So, I mean, they obviously didn't have that much animosity towards him if they were involved.
Yeah, I mean, I think the animosity was. The reason if they did in fact kill him was not because they they didn't appreciate everything he had done for the state of Israel. It had more to do with the fact that he was threatening to reveal things about them. And Chaim Herzog, the president of Israel, gave a really incredibly heroic address and was very, very favorable and honorable about his comments about the late publisher Robert Maxwell. But that does not stop the fact that he, in fact, probably knew that the Mossad were the company or the intelligence agency that killed him. So,
can I just point out
Yeah.
something? We're going to get another slide up here that I think is going to blow people's minds.
all right.
Little did we know when we did our research that 1989, 2 years prior to his death, guess who was on his yacht with him, Zev?
I guess, because I know, it's Donald J. Trump, a very young Donald J. Trump. At the time, he was a guest on board Maxwell's Ghislaine, that's the name of the yacht, and also the name of Maxwell's daughter. They were both there for a little party. In fact, so was Mr. John Tower, the senator we were just talking about, and other great dignitaries, as you can see there. So it was a fun place to hang out. And there's an interesting note in this, I guess, because it appears that Donald Trump may have maybe leaked this report to the newspaper, the St. Louis Dispatch Post, because in it he says that the two men, Maxwell and himself, compared their yacht size, and guess whose yacht came out bigger? I got a bigger yacht than yours.
Is this a small hands reference? Because I don't know, Sam.
Small hands, big yacht. You know what they say. You know what they say.
So if we think about this timeline, because I told you guys we're going to talk about a lot of timelines tonight. So this was 89 that Trump was on the boat with Maxwell, and that was 2 years before he died, and he had obviously met Ghislaine in the 80s. Well, guess what else was happening in the 80s?
I'm guessing, I don't know, he was running for president or something like that briefly.
He was denying it.
He was
but
denying it.
He maybe was thinking about it. Let's take a look.
He was thinking about it. The best hair for both of these two people.
The 80s hair is the best hair. I don't
That
fight me.
I
But
mean-
I'm going on the record.
Oprah looks fantastic. That hair, I don't think she's ever had hair like that. His hair looks real too. Which is probably what it looked like back then.
Back in the day.
You know, if only he'd stuck to his word. I mean, at the end of the day, wouldn't it have been nice if, I mean, I'm projecting, of course, but wouldn't it be nice if Donald Trump had not run for president, many people would say. He also seems to have not changed his tune on some things. He seems to be a fan of countries that he's still a fan of today. Japan, Kuwait, I'm sure a lot of other countries that were involved in money flight through the 1980s and through the 1990s, which is sort of why we got to where we are today, the debt situation that we're in today.
Right. So if we go back to 1991.
Let's go. Take me back. Take me back, 'cause I'm losing my space.
That's okay. I'm gonna keep this time.
So we got dead Robert Maxwell. Did that.
Yes.
Okay.
But just prior to him dying in 1991, he actually, even though he was facing all these financial challenges with the mirror, somehow he bought the New York Daily News.
Curious that he was able to afford the Daily News while also being in trouble with the Mirror. However, that was not long lived, because he had to actually, after his death, the newspaper was shut down. Not at least shut down, it's still operating today, but it was bankrupt and went into one of its many legendary refinancings. Ghislaine moved to New York in order to be there with the New York Daily News as it was receiving its new ownership. And she also began a very interesting new life. She became a Manhattan socialite. She had to work on the side because her dad was no longer well, she wasn't as wealthy because her dad was passed away and the businesses had gone bankrupt. But she worked on the side in real estate. You know who else worked in real estate? Donald Trump. And they were often spotted out on the town together. Look at this picture from 1997. That's Ghislaine with very nice short hair. And Donald Trump looks like he's about to take off.
I don't know what's going on with his face in that picture.
I don't know. He's either seen something he really wants or really hates. Either way, that's him from 1997. It's an incredible picture because it gives us real proof, in fact, that they knew each other way back then, which is important to the story of Epstein and Ghislaine and Trump. So by the following year, Ghislaine had begun to date Jeffrey Epstein.
Yes, she started dating him, Zeb, in 1992.
And the earliest photo we could find of his and her was 1995, already beautiful women. We don't know their ages, but certainly on both their arms. And it became really interesting. It's particularly interesting because he was very wealthy. He was reputed to be a financier. He had apparently billions of dollars worth of clients, but no one really knows where the money came from. He was born in Coney Island. He's the son of a parks and recreation worker. Yet somehow he lived the most lavish lifestyle in the world.
Yeah, he had a unique story to tell one of his ex-girlfriends, and I think that it's worth pointing it out. He said that he made his millions as a bounty hunter recovering stolen money for a government.
Oh,
Which government?
right. Probably
This
he,
is
he
true
did not
story.
say. He did not say. And what is a bounty hunter for a government? Really, it doesn't necessarily exist. Later on he would say he was a financier. We do know this. We do know that he, like Maxwell, was a big fan of Israel. He had two interests that he donated to: science and Israel. And Israel was always the first among them. And the reason we know that he was close to Israel as well is that Prime Minister Ehud Barak, the former Prime Minister of Israel, was in that contact book that was found later on with all these incredible names. Bill Clinton's name in it, Donald Trump's name, Ivanka. There's a bunch of names. We've been through it, and it's quite an interesting list. We'll tell you more about that in the days to come. But among those names, Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, and even this week, Bibi Netanyahu was ribbing his predecessor about being included in that book when it was first released earlier on this week. So
For our timeline, late 80s, early 90s, these guys, they're all friends. They all know each other, and they're in South Florida. So let's go there, Zev. Let's do it.
it's South Florida. We were both alive back then. I'm not going to pretend that we weren't. And it was an interesting, swinging kind of time because you didn't even have to wear ties back then, people. Which leads us to just up the road from Miami, because we're going to take you to Palm Beach. This is where these guys met. Donald Trump, well, actually, we're not quite sure where they met. We do know that they hung out a lot in this period of time.
They partied together both in New York City and in Palm Beach. So
Yeah, I mean, this was they had houses close to each other, which is nice in New York, and then in Palm Beach. But this is the era of cocaine. This was the era of sex. They were fully into it. And how close were they? I mean, just take a look at this. This is
super duper close. I did this map today. I was curious. How far is Mar-a-Lago from Jeffrey Epstein's mansion? Guys,
answer?
look at this. It's like less than 2 miles. You could walk there. They're so close.
You literally could. According to that map, it says just 27 minutes. But if you had a car, it's just 5 minutes, and they all have beautiful cars there. The other thing to really focus on in this picture is the house itself. This is the Miami house, the Palm Beach house of Epstein. Look at the size of it. It is enormous. It's facing the bay, which is mostly more private. It's assumed to be more private than the beach side. But even if it weren't so private, you look at the on the bottom picture there, circled in the red. You can see that you cannot see it beyond the walls, beyond those trees that are covering whatever was going on behind those trees, which is that pool. That spectacular long pool. And then in the front, if you look at the front picture, you're also not really able to see what's going on inside the house. Palm Beach is tiny. It's just full of very, very wealthy people who can get away with a lot because they run that town. And this is one of the houses where a lot of crime happened and a lot of things that we're still going to discover as to what kind of the nature and the complexity and the cruelty that went on in that Palm Beach home. And of course, it was not far away from where the president still calls the Winter White House, Mar-a-Lago, just up the street, down the street, along the beach, the beautiful resort of Mar-a-Lago. So, this could in fact become a very intense crime scene. And if it has been, it is now going to become a crime scene that we're all more aware of. It's going to be covered in a very dramatic way. And I think everything that has happened in Palm Beach in the last 50 years is going to be looked at in a very different way. I don't want to get too close to the minutiae of the story, but there are people who have been in power in Palm Beach for 30, 40 years who oversaw a lot of things, who allowed a lot of things to happen. He loves going down there because he runs the town. I'm talking about Trump. He hasn't spoken to Epstein in many years, and we take that at face value. But Epstein also really has a long history there that's really interesting. I guess they.
In fact, I want to point out an article that came up just a few days ago, Zev. It just shows the closeness of that relationship and the serious partying that was going on between these two men. Because in 1992, Trump wanted to have what he called a VIP party at his Mar-a-Lago, and he wanted this guy that he knew. He said, "Send me in these as many bikini-clad women as you can. We're going to have a calendar contest." Well, it turns out that the only two VIPs that were going to be part of this 1992 party were Epstein and Trump and 28 young women.
I mean, that just it breaks your heart. We don't know the ages of the women, but you kind of know what happened there, and it certainly was not that the women had a lot of power in that situation. 28 girls in a really awkward and awful situation, probably, that they were placed in. The pictures that you're looking at, it looked like Jeffrey Epstein did not did not sleep between 1997 and the year 2000.
He didn't have a stylist either, Zeb.
Because he wore the same clothes. But you can see that there are these two pictures taken at very different times. That's Ghislaine there on the very right, and Melania before she was the first lady alongside Donald Trump in a very, very different time. But still, with all of this, there's one burning question.
Where did Epstein get the money to live this lavish lifestyle?
Right. I want to know the answer to this question, because no matter what, this was expensive. We'd later discover he had an island. He basically, it's hard to own an island. It's not maybe the biggest island in the world, but it's not cheap. He had millions and millions, and if not $1 billion worth of assets in different places. And how did he get it? This was the son of a Parks and Recs guy from Coney Island. This did not come to him out of nothing. It came to him, we believe, by all indications, it came to him from this man, who is recognizable to New Yorkers, I think, because he, for a brief period of time, was about to be the owner, or maybe was the owner, of the New York Post. And
he claims that he was.
And this is a picture taken outside of the Trump Towers, because that's where he had his offices. And we're talking about Stephen Hoffenberg. He was Epstein's mentor for a long period of time. He's also the source of Epstein's cash flow. And this is a bit of a timeline that requires a little bit of explanation. So let's go back to 1993. We had that 28-girl calendar party happening at Mar-a-Lago. And then take us through what happens next.
Right. So that was in 1992. In 1993, this guy, Stephen Hoffenberg, he leased an office in Trump Tower. In fact, he was on the 15th floor. And I think, Zev, you've said that Trump's office was on the 18th floor.
Trump is on the 18th. Everyone thinks he'd be on a higher floor, but no, he wants to rent that out to make more money. So the 18th floor is the floor where it all happened in Trump Tower. And I think Felix Sater's, for a period of time there, was on the 16th. Bayrock was on the 16th. So you can see that the floors were full of friends, so to speak.
Right. So Stephen Hoffenberg was the mentor of Jeffrey Epstein. I believe he hired him in 1987, and they worked together until 1993, around that same time that he rented leased the office space from Donald Trump. Well, in 1993, he started being investigated. Mm-hmm. You want to tell him why?
Well, the SEC took a deep interest into what they were doing, because they were basically involved in large-scale fraud. Not just any fraud, it was real estate fraud and financial fraud and securities fraud, but it involved a lot of people's money, a lot of people's hard-earned money that was basically building into a Ponzi scheme. Before Bernie Madoff, these guys were the Ponzi kings. They were the first people to really try, it's such a daring and incredible crime that ultimately $450 million of it went missing, at least. Today, it's valued probably at $1 billion. But if you want to know where Epstein got his cash, a good place to look at is right here, because at Towers Financial, $450 million went missing. For a while, they played the stock prices of all these companies, attempting to buy Pan Am at one point. They were ballsy, to say the least. And And
There was
somehow,
insider trading
yeah,
going on. I mean, they were just, you name it, committing a fraud. They were doing it, Zeb.
they were. And Hoffenberg landed up going to jail for 18 years. And, you know, when he came out, appears much more repentant. I spoke to him at length today on the phone, and he has an interesting story to tell. He certainly says that Epstein has the money and that Epstein's assets are in that money, are made up of that money. And he points particularly to the island and elsewhere. He thinks those can all be derived directly from the losses of, you know, 200, maybe 200,000 people, I think it was. There's
Yeah.
astonishing number of people that were victims of this crime. And
I
it's,
did a lot of research today. I know you spoke to him for like an hour,
yeah,
and he's a very interesting guy.
sure is,
But for me, I'm like, I need to know all of the legal stuff. So I kind of took a step back and read everything that happened. Basically, when Hoffenberg got arrested for his Towers Financial, which that name is really ironic, isn't it?
seems to be.
When he got arrested, and then there were co-conspirators that were not named in the indictment. Okay, he didn't do this alone, but it was never stated who was his co-conspirator. He didn't tell. He never told.
Which is interesting. I mean, especially because you consider the fact that Epstein actually took a plea deal in order to tell on Hoffenberg. Why wouldn't he turn around and say, "Well, Epstein did it too"? But he didn't do that. He didn't. He chose to go to jail.
He didn't. He
Yeah.
didn't, and he was in jail for 18 years. In May of 2016, we start to see events change. Okay, and Hoffenberg decided to file a civil lawsuit against Jeffrey Epstein because he's saying that Jeffrey was actually the mastermind and that they were co-conspirators in this Ponzi scheme. And all of this money that Jeffrey Epstein took from the Ponzi scheme, and by the way, in 1995, he set up his own company in the Virgin Islands. So Jeffrey, it is alleged, was taking the proceeds from this Ponzi scheme and moving it offshore into this bank account, one of 3 bank accounts that are mentioned.
And it's important to note that we've done some work on this. There's more to be revealed. The people who are in charge of those offshore bank accounts also connect back to the Trump world. And maybe this is just a small group of, you know, very, very rich people who show up everywhere, or maybe there's some other connections that we need to look at in terms of how this money landed up arriving at the
Right.
British Virgin Islands and who is the actual holder of the ownership there. So
So
we're going to be
that's-
investigating that
Yes,
still to
so
come.
that's May 6th, 2016, Zeb. So this is a civil
Oh wait,
lawsuit.
2016. So May
Right.
2016, you might recall, is about the time that the elections were heating up. This is also
Around then.
interesting. It's also interesting because Hoffenberg was involved in that. I'll tell you a little bit more about that coming up as we tell you this rest of this lawsuit.
Right. So he filed this lawsuit in May 2016 because he felt like he wanted, this is what he says. Hoffenberg wants the people who suffered through their Ponzi scheme and who are the victims, they were awarded hundreds of millions of dollars. So it was Hoffenberg who said, I'm going to sue Jeffrey Epstein to get this money that he's hiding to give back to these victims. Well, for some reason, and I don't understand all the legality of it, that civil lawsuit never happened. It never went through. So let's fast forward to August 2018. In August 2018, Stephen Hoffenberg, he did a legal affidavit where he went through and stated, this is what Jeffrey did with me. He is my co-conspirator. This is how we took the money. This is where I think, he put it. He did it as a legal affidavit. And that triggered the victims of the original Ponzi scheme to then file a lawsuit against Jeffrey Epstein as the co-conspirator.
Now, he's more nuanced than that today about what happened back then. He talks a lot about being almost bullied into a position where he was forced to take what he calls this aggressive management moves. They're clearly illegal management moves, but for him to, he's saying he was not the guy who initiated this kind of aggressive stance. He was not the guy who was in favor of it. It was Epstein who was the architect of all of it, and that he was in fact bullied by the other managers and Epstein himself to go along with it, because those were the times of excessive growth. They wanted to match the market, and so they did. He says he was against it at first, but then was sort of forced into it. Today, he is incredibly contrite. He says that he needs to do everything he can to get the money back to his victims. He really does seem to be upset about the fact that this happened, that he was in charge of the operation while it happened. And he's also convinced that they can do that. He's been in touch with the SEC, and this is news, I'm not sure it's been out there, but he's been in touch with the Securities and Exchange Commission as recently as this week to talk about how these victims might be able to get their assets back. And that would involve the SEC removing the limitation on action, which has stopped them from doing it up to now. I'm not sure quite how that's going to work, but if it's successful, we could see a lawsuit, this class action lawsuit, explode into quite a massive thing where they're trying to get back all these assets from Epstein. Some of these are offshore, but some of them are not. The island is actually registered to a Delaware company. It's an LLC, but it's a Delaware company. That could well be taken back by the owners. The New York Post is in this mix, weirdly enough, because he was, for once, a publisher of the New York Post. And now the owners of the New York Post, I think, are the victims of Jeffrey Epstein. So you can see how this will ripple through all of our society, all through the New York rich and wealthy, and who knows who the ultimate holders of those offshore holdings are. I mean, they could be anyone.
Right. So, if we think about our timeline from, 1990s all the way through till when all of this came forward in 2018, 2016, Jeffrey Epstein allegedly has had a hold of all of this money, that much of which is owed to the victims of the original Ponzi scheme.
Which is unbelievable. And there is a part here in this lawsuit, the class action lawsuit, where it says, while Hoffenberg was convicted as a result of his role in the Ponzi scheme, Epstein has remained an uncharged co-conspirator. All the while, Epstein knowingly and intentionally utilized funds he fraudulently diverted and obtained from the massive Ponzi scheme for his own personal use to support a lavish lifestyle. And that is in fact what we're seeing. All of Epstein's acts, it says here, and omissions as alleged herein, were in contravention of duties owed to TFC plaintiffs and the class action group, and in violation of the law. So they're saying everything he did was illegal. Everything he owns should be handed over to them because it's owed to them.
Right.
Could
so
get tricky.
All those parties with Donald Trump and his girlfriend Ghislaine, were they all being paid for by this money that was stolen out of this Ponzi scheme?
Well, the one thing that we do know is there's a lot of blackmailable material that was taken during those parties, including sex acts by famous or well-known people with some of these victims. It's unclear whether we're going to see them, but this coming soon, I think the Second Circuit is going to be releasing at least 2,000 documents, or could be thereabout, which could be very embarrassing to a lot of people. So, you wonder not so much about the money as much as there's blackmail. Why does he need the blackmail? He needs the blackmail to cover himself for all the criminality that he's already doing. And he's got a lot of people probably very worried. A lot of people who over a long period of time have said that this guy's untouchable, and he must have felt untouchable in much the same way that Donald Trump sort of, when he said, I can go out into the center of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and no one will do anything. This is the kind of invincibility that Epstein must have, maybe not so much today, but up until this week must have had in terms of his ability to do everything he was doing with impunity, and because he had that backup, he had all those documents with famous people and pictures and elsewhere. And those people are very nervous today because that stuff's coming out and there's no way to keep a lid on it, I don't think, because the public have a right to know. These people also have a right to know. There's 200,000 people. This is just some of the list, including the class action lawsuit, of people who lost a lot of their money because of Jeffrey Epstein and because of Hoffenberg. And so those people want their money back. And that puts us in a incredibly, it's hard to overestimate the size of this case and how important this is going to be. Probably the most important case in American history when you really think about it. It's varying dimensions.
Yeah. Another interesting point that we found about Hoffenberg that I didn't know, he not only in 1993 had his office in Trump Tower, and once he got out of jail, he got married in front of Trump Tower. But we also know now that he had his very own super PAC to
He
get
did.
Donald Trump elected in 2016.
Yeah, and it's a super PAC that he originally wanted to form with Roger Stone, and I can tell you that it never really raised any money because of some weird thing, which I'm not even going to go into here because it gets too complicated. But boy, did he leave us a little memento from that super PAC. Here's Hoffenberg explaining what it's like to be a Ponzi king.
And if you would like me to make you a Ponzi king or Ponzi queen inside of 1 minute or 20 minutes, I could probably do that a little bit, where I could teach you how to be a Ponzi queen. Now, I am a Ponzi king,
queen,
but I'm a Ponzi king.
You can tell us how you got to be called, though, the Ponzi king, and why you haven't given it in 25 years.
I am in the media. I did run the New York Post newspaper. I do own New York Post Publishing. And Rupert Murdoch stole the newspaper from us. Real simple. He stole it. And we're going to take it back from good old Rupert, who forgot everything. He's 85 now. He remembers Jerry Hall, his new wife. He's having a lot of fun with her. But he forgot that the Tower's financial victims put up all the darn money for the New York Post from Peter Calico, and we own the copyrights. And we're going to see Mr. Rupert Murdoch in front of a federal judge very, very soon. And the Tower's financial victims are going to take back their possession, the New York Post newspaper, on the newsstand, and they're going to lower the price to 25 cents. That's what they're going to do. I've been on the phone with the unions continuously about this take back, and while lawyers are getting ready to teach Mr. Rupert Murdoch a little bit of a lesson that Roger Ailes would like to teach him, I feel bad for Roger Ailes, this slanderous crap of him trying to have sex with these girls. That's a lot of nonsense. Roger Ailes is a fabulous media man, and Mr. Murdoch is the crummy guy.
Now, I mean, that's interesting because, firstly, I mean, I don't know what the state of play is actually with the New York Post of the story. Those are fighting words by Mr. Hoffenberg, but I don't think he's scaring off Mr. Murdoch yet. And it doesn't seem like that's his lawsuits or his claims of lawsuits have materialized. It's also, interesting to note how he thinks that the Ailes allegations, which were just allegations at the time that video was made, are not true. And yet today he seems quite concerned about the women involved with Jeffrey Epstein, or that were assaulted by Jeffrey Epstein. So, maybe it's a person who takes the situation as it comes and changes his opinions. But he's a colorful character for sure. He has not spoken.
I can only imagine what that hour-long conversation was like today, Seth, after watching that video.
He's not as vibrant as in that video, I will say. And of course, it's been a few years. He hasn't spoken to the president since he was elected. He says that he's a liability, really, and he wouldn't want to spend time with the president. But he claims that during the transition, during the election campaign, he was very, very much present in the offices up there at Trump Tower, that he helped advise some of the staff there, including revelations about Paul Manafort, which we'll cover on a different day. But it's clear that there is a good bond there between him and Trump that is still existent today. However, they keep their distance from each other, as does Trump, by the way, from Jeffrey Epstein. And this is one important thing I should mention about today's call. He says that it is true, in fact, that Trump, once he found out about the girl who was involved with Prince Andrew, who we believe Epstein picked up while she was working at Mar-a-Lago. That when Trump did find out about it, he did actually break off his friendship at that point, banned Epstein from being there ever again, from going to Mar-a-Lago, and that they didn't speak again. Now, I don't know if that's true. It is interesting that Hoffenberg and Epstein did bump into each other once on the street. They weren't allowed to, but
How do you say awkward?
awkward moment. But they did actually, they did see each other once. So there's so much to be told in the story, but really, we can't lose sight of the victims of Epstein, the women who attacked, but also the financial victims who lost so much money during that period of time.
Yeah, so if we once again go back and we look at this timeline of what was going on in the 90s, and like we said, 87 to 93 was this Ponzi scheme where they made off with all of this stolen money. This was also a really difficult time for Trump during the 90s. And we did a little timeline here to show you.
Yeah, I mean we're in the timeline business, so that's how we find things. That's how we find connecting dots, and we're not saying they're connecting dots here because we're not sure. But we can say, hey, look at this. This is interesting. These two things line up a little bit. In '91, Trump's Taj Mahal goes bankrupt. In '92, the Plaza Hotel goes bankrupt. He's not bankrupt at that time, but his companies really are. He's basically a figurehead of these companies while they try to reconstitute themselves. And then lo and behold, it's 1996. He's flush with cash. He buys Miss Universe, he buys Miss USA, and he returns to the Forbes 400 list with an estimated value of $450 million. Now, it is the same amount as we've been talking about, a similar amount as we've been talking about, but that really cannot be read as being connected. The thing to look at here is really the timing, because between 1987 and 1993, all this money was stolen by Hoffenberg and Epstein. That is around the time that Trump was losing money, and he might have been looking for places to get some money. We're not saying this is where he turned, but it's certainly worth investigating. It is also interesting that they both sort of rebounded in 1996. Trump rebounds with Miss Universe and Miss USA to the tune of $450 million, and for the financial trust companies born in the British Virgin Islands by Epstein.
Yeah, and we don't obviously we don't know. We could speculate on a lot of things, but then you hear something like, or you read something like Trump's tweet today. In fact, today he tweeted that all of the fake news about banks not wanting to give him loans, it's just not true, because he doesn't need banks. He does it the old-fashioned way. So like a light bulb went off to me, and I thought, oh, you don't need banks?
Who do you
Where
call?
are you getting that money from?
When you
Your
said that to me
friends?
earlier on, I was like, because you got to speak Russian to answer that question properly. I mean, we know that Russia bailed him out a couple of times. We suspect Russia bailed him out a couple of times. And the other party that bailed him out, Deutsche Bank. Guess what? Hey, let's play a game. Shall we? Let's play a game of coincidence. Well, as I pull it up a little too late for my own cue, here's coincidence. So on the left, Donald Trump. On the right, Epstein. I'll be Donald Trump. Did Donald Trump use Deutsche Bank in any way to get out of bankruptcy? Yes, indeed, he did. He used the real estate division to get out of bankruptcy and to also fund his large empire when no one else was willing to fund it.
That's funny, because it turns out that Epstein was using Deutsche Bank as well, their private banking division, and up until May 2019.
Wow, isn't that interesting? Interesting.
is.
They both like Deutsche Bank, and Deutsche Bank implicated in yet another scandal today involving all sorts of money laundering. Maybe unrelated, could be related as well. Then there's the Attorney General, the current Attorney General, Bill Barr. We've come to know him as a big, loyal fan of the president's in the way he's been handling the Mueller investigation. Well, you know what? He's also...
It turns out that Bill Barr's father was a fan of, guess who? Jeffrey Epstein, because he got him a teaching job at a prestigious school.
When the guy didn't even barely, I think he didn't actually finish his college degree. He went to the Cooper Union, and then lo and behold, Bill Barr's father gives him this incredible job teaching math to a bunch of girls. I mean, and boys, but the idea is quite shocking to think that that's what happened. Of course, Bill Barr had originally recused himself from Jeffrey Epstein because this is ridiculous. That his father employed Epstein. He cannot possibly be in charge of this investigation. And then the other day, he decided to unrecuse himself because obviously he's facing pressure from the White House to pay extra special attention to this. And this is a big point. If Bill Barr starts messing with this investigation, it really puts into doubt the justice system and what kind of system we have, and whether we're a banana republic or not. It should also be noted that Bill Barr worked for Epstein's law firm, or the law firm that represented Epstein way back when. So, maybe there's a link there. Maybe there isn't a link. The other big link between these two guys is Bear Stearns. When Donald Trump was first starting to build these big Atlantic City casinos, he needed money. He needed money from people who had deep pockets, and Bear Stearns were there to give it to him. Particularly Alan Greenberg, the guy who was in charge of Bear Stearns, the CEO of the company back then. his name was Ace Greenberg, and we'll show in a few minutes how connected he is to Donald Trump. And guess what?
This is where this is it. I mean, you couldn't make this stuff up. It's so crazy. So, okay, Bill Barr's dad gave Epstein this job teaching, which he left in 1981. Why? Because he met through one of his students, Ace Greenberg.
So
And then he went to
no
work
relation.
for Bear Stearns.
Yes, and got not just an ordinary job at Bear Stearns, got a very senior job at Bear Stearns for a guy who hadn't finished a college degree and whose current experience had only been teaching math to a bunch of boys and girls at a very high-end school. So you want some backup of this? You know, we turn a lot to our friend Lincoln's Bible on Twitter. If you're not following her or him, you're not following the right people. This is how we know, because of the incredible research at Lincoln's Bible. And in this particular, these are 3 depositions. Donald Trump talking about his relationship with Bear Stearns, calling them a wonderful company, saying he worked with them on mortgage bond issues, worked with them at Trump's Castle and at Trump Plaza, a wonderful company. Again, he says in another deposition, he says he called Greenberg's office directly and said, buy stocks, meaning Donald Trump doesn't have to go through any broker like you or me. He has to go through. He goes through to the CEO, Greenberg, directly to buy stocks. And then at another deposition, it's declared that Mr. Greenberg is Mr. Trump's personal stockbroker. So no confusion there. Greenberg is close to Trump. Greenberg close to Epstein too. How do we know that? Again, Lincoln's Bible. She brings us 2 articles from Vanity Fair. This one, the top one, talks specifically about how he became a limited partner, just beneath a full partner. Kind of amazing for a guy with 0 experience.
Yeah, and I think if I recall, Zeb, there were some questions about whether he was doing some fraudulent stuff there too, which is why he ended up leaving.
You are correct. In fact, that is why he left. You know, he left under a bit of a cloud of suspicion. The SEC had started investigating him and what Bear Stearns was doing with relation to Edgar Bronfman, who we all know from Seagram's and a bunch of other related scandals that we've been covering. To say the least, this is a very, very murky, messy environment, because we know Bear Stearns was partly responsible for the collapse of the economy a few years later, and Epstein is stuck in the middle of it. Trump's related to it. Ace Greenberg's there. And so is one other name we've come to know, Felix Sater.
This is what's great. You know, if you know us at Narrative Live, you know we know a lot about Felix Sater. We do a lot of reporting on him. So let's just throw that slide up there to show that he's tied to Bear Stearns as well.
Well, you know, Sater, here he is in just another deposition, saying that he worked there for between 6 to 12 months. You could tell he's downscaling that. It was probably around a year, maybe even low. He was doing a call center job, he says. He was licensed at the time, but that license was yanked from him in what is now quite a legendary bar brawl that he had, involving a margarita glass, or the stem of one. It was over a woman, and he landed up in a bad situation. He lost his license. He went around for a couple of other companies after that. But for a while there, he worked at Bear Stearns, which was quite a hard job to do. Of course, he and Epstein came from Coney Island, like Michael Cohen. They might have had connections within Bear Stearns to get them those jobs. Who knows? But it is interesting that they both worked there at different times, and that Bear Stearns was so important to Trump.
The theme of all this, I just keep hearing that Disney song, "It's a Small World After All."
Small world for some.
Going through my mind.
Yeah, it really is. And the thing is about the small world is it is now visible to all of us. And in the next few weeks, we're going to see so many different developments on the story that it's quite hard to actually see where the limitations are. You know, we've been used to a roller coaster ride over the last 2.5 years, but this is going to be incredible. We're talking about, you know, the hundreds maybe of well-known people potentially implicated in compromising situations. We're talking about an investigation into the victims and this incredible kidnapping, abuse, sex slavery, rape of so many people, of so many young women. And on top of that, possibly one of the biggest Ponzi schemes ever being uncovered, and 200,000 victims there seeking restitution. And that's just the beginning of what we're going to see, because we haven't even touched the politics of this yet.
Right. We'll be watching, you know, people like Dershowitz and Acosta and Ghislaine Maxwell. But I think what we're really going to be watching is how this is going to affect what is already a really embattled White House.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think at the end of the day, especially with Acosta, I think this thing, it's unseemly, but they might want to hold on because we now know what they're covering up, and there's a lot there that they're covering up, and maybe Acosta's the only guy who can do it. And we're still to learn if there are any other connections beyond the ones we know that may have got Epstein off the hook, because we don't know the full story there yet either. Dershowitz
guys, I can tell you, with us spending 2 days doing all this investigating, digging, talking to sources, every minute today we had something new come to us, and we just had to cut it off and say, this is what we're going to report tonight, and we will keep you guys updated because this story is evolving like you wouldn't even believe.
Yeah, so it's going to be a roller coaster, and we want to thank you for joining us today because we're glad to finally get it. I feel like I've given birth, like finally all this information we've been holding on to, because there has been a lot of incredible detail. As you could tell, we've got our ears out in many places, and we're getting information that we will verify first before revealing. But there are stunning developments still to come out of just the last couple of days as we've been learning more about Jeffrey Epstein. You could always support our work. We really appreciate it because we don't get time to earn any money any other way. So please, if you can, go to patreon.com/narrative and donate and subscribe to our services. We'll soon be having our entire VOD catalog will be stationed there, so it'll be the only place you'll be able to watch video on demand. So it's a worthwhile investment. And we want to thank you for joining us tonight. Tracie, last thoughts from you.
Oh gosh, I just feel great. I know it's an hour-long show, and we fed you with so much information, but please feel free to tweet at us if you have any questions about tonight's show. And if we don't have the answers, we'll do a little research and we'll try to get back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are a lot of good theories and ideas and incredible researchers that we are part of that universe of the citizen journalists that have crowdsourced this incredible investigation. This is tailor-made for the skills that we know everyone has in this group. So if you find stuff, make sure we get to see it. We'd love to include you and it in our broadcasts. And with that, I think it's time to say good night.
Good night.